We're going to do another segment on common mistakes we see when transmissions are being installed. Another thing, and this is probably the granddad of them all, the biggest problem that we see with transmission installations is the cooler lines not being flushed. It's a huge problem. I'll explain to you what this machine is. This machine is made specifically for hot flushing transmission coolers and cooler lines. It's actually put out by a company called Hot Flush. This machine heats up to between 150 to 180 degrees. You hook these two hoses to the cooler lines and it flushes them two ways. It flushes them forward, then it flushes them backwards. And it does it in a pulsating motion, so it pumps that hot fluid through the cooler and the cooler lines. Because quite often is what happens is when your transmission fails, a lot of times there's a lot of metal that goes through the system. Well, that metal gets up in the transmission cooler and it sits there, and just hooking an air hose to it and running a can of brake clean or a can of transmission flush through it does not get that metal out of there. So you blow through it, you hook everything back up, and you still have metal in your cooler. Is what this machine does is it gets the fluid hot, it forward and reverse pumps the fluid through the system, and then at the end of it, it does a flow check, so you can actually see how much fluid is flowing through that system, and it comes up on a digital display here that shows you what your flow is. If you're doing a lot of transmissions, this machine is probably the most unreplaceable machine that we have. It gets used constantly, daily. We have 4 of these machines. Each tech has their own, and it will save you a ton of headaches and a ton of time. Quite often is what we see when we send a transmission out. If you don't have a hot flush machine, we will actually send you a cooler with the transmission. We'll send you a new cooler, an external cooler, and you're supposed to bypass your factory cooler and run this cooler. Very often, those coolers don't get installed. And I think a lot of shops don't understand how important that is, because when you think those cooler lines are flushed and you hook that transmission up, all of a sudden everything seems to be working good. You're driving down the road, that fluid gets nice and hot, starts putting pressure in that transmission cooler. All of a sudden all that metal and all that garbage that's collected inside that transmission cooler flushes back right into your brand new transmission. So now you have a problem because you can't deliver your car to the customer. You call us, we have a problem because the transmission's not working. We get it back here, we drop the pan, we find that there's a bunch of metal and clutch material in the pan. Well, quite often that clutch material and material comes out of the transmission cooler. So now we have a big problem. We have to tear that transmission back down, clean all the metal out of it, and put it back together. And then you have to reinstall it back in the vehicle. It's probably the most common thing that we see on transmission installations is not taking care properly of the coolers, or bypassing them if you don't have the ability to hot flush them. Or, a lot of shops, they sell a new radiator. If the cooler happens to be in the radiator, which a lot of them are, they will actually sell the customer a new radiator with their transmission to circumvent this problem of having garbage flushed out of the old cooler into your brand new transmission. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is. If you are sent a new cooler with the transmission, please install it. It's a huge problem. We see them not installed all the time. They come back here, transmission's full of garbage from not having the cooler flushed out. So please pay close attention to that, because that is the most common thing that we see. We talked earlier about when we send out a transmission, when you purchase one from us, we send out a cooler with it. There's different sizes and different shapes. This is just one example that I'm using. This is a Hayden cooler, and there's different styles of cooler. You can see on here these plates that go all the way through. This is called a plate style cooler. These are definitely the better cooler. They have one that's just called a fin cooler, where there's no plates in it, and it's just fins that run up and down. And as what happens is those fins will get, through time, they get bugs and garbage and they get pressed over, and they just don't work as efficiently and they don't work as well. These plate style coolers dissipate the heat and get rid of the heat a lot better. So when we send you out a transmission, if you're not putting a new radiator or something in it, this is the style cooler that you will get with it. And like I say, it's very important if we send this out to you that you replace it. You know, it's hard for us to get a car back here that we've given you a cooler for and you didn't replace it. It's hard for us to warranty that problem when the problem came from, you know, the garbage coming out of the old cooler. So, you know, we there's a purpose and a reason that we send you those, and when they don't get installed, you know, a lot of times it's on your dime that we have to pull that transmission back out and clean all the metal and garbage out of it, when, you know, it was pretty easy just to install that cooler. Sometimes it takes a half an hour, sometimes it takes an hour. The customer seems to always understand, you know, it's going to cost a little bit extra to put this in. Time-wise, this is included in the price of the transmission, so really all you're out is a little bit of extra time. We don't usually charge the customer any extra labor or anything. We just, if we do get a bad cooler and it won't flush out, we usually install them just to cover ourselves to make sure that there's not a problem.